Our conversation is on the role of recycling in combating climate change. And you do understand that in Kenya, we produce a lot of tons of waste every day, much of which ends up in waterways, contributing to pollution and, of course, worsening climate change. And to help me with this conversation this morning is James Odongo, that is the CEO of Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO. And I don't know if you should tell us more about your work, or I should just introduce, his work focuses more on ensuring manufacturers and companies take responsibility for the waste they generate. I hope I haven't butchered what you do at KEPRO.
No, sure. Thank you first and for having us today morning. I think you've rightly captured it. So a bit about KEPRO is that we are that entity, the leading producer organization in Kenya, that seeks to take producers, and in this case we are having visionary entities to around 1,000 companies that we represent, and working on taking responsibility of the environmental consequences of the products that they put out into the Kenyan market, at least from a post-consumer level point of view. Yes.
Just like I've mentioned that, of course, we produce a lot of tons waste in this country. And Nairobi, for instance, I understand we produce around 2,400 tons of waste daily. And you see, this larger percentage of it is not properly recycled. Watu wa Kisumu wananifuata this morning. So why are we struggling so much with waste management, James?
Okay, so I think, and you've rightly put it, so the tonnage would be on different fronts. We've seen statistics suggesting that we could be generating up to 4,000 metric tons. So 2,400 is a minimalistic viewpoint. But now you're looking at 4,000 metric tons being generated in a day. And we've seen statistics, I think, from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics back in 2022. There was also a JICA report back in 2010 that revealed that our recycling rates are anywhere between 10 to 20%. And of course, this is differentiated on a fraction basis. So plastic would be doing anywhere between 10 to 11%, and the other fractions well below 10%. So really, the 10 to 20% is an average basis. Yes.
So do we have an efficient waste segregation system in this country?
And unfortunately, and that is one of the biggest pain points for us as an organization, that even as we are speaking about transitioning Kenya from a linear to a recycling economy and ultimately to a circular economy, that the main stakeholder in this conversation, you and I as a consumer at household level, are not first, not even about separation of waste at source, but really also at that point of disposal, we are still having scenarios of illegal dumping and the likes, and that's one of our major pain points. Of course, we not only see it as a challenge, but have also seen it as an opportunity to embed and inspire behavior change amongst our consumers. So ensuring that first, we are putting it in a bin. That is the first entry point. Then the second entry point is, after Anne has put it in a bin, then can we sensitize her to put it in the right bin? So last year, around December, NEMA published what we call the National Color-Coded Bins. And here we are saying that you and I need to separate our waste at source right at household level into 3 fractions. So when you're saying 3 fractions, we are talking about organic waste, recyclable waste, and general waste. So organic waste, for instance, would be the likes of your food waste from your kitchen. We'd also be having the recyclable waste. So here you'd be having glass, paper, plastic, and really any other forms of packaging and products made out of metal and aluminum. And then, of course, the other fractions that are not necessarily recyclable, such as the diapers and the sanitary pads, are put in the general waste bin. So long and short of it is that as Kenya, we are yet to realize that aspect of proper separation of waste at source. But I think we've started the journey with one step. Of course, the ultimate goal is to realize that 1,000 step where we'll be having full separation of waste at source. We've seen it being done in other countries, where some countries are achieving up to 98% segregation efficiency. Yes.
When you're talking about we are not there yet, but you're getting there, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are we doing exactly, 10 being the highest?
I'd put it at a 2.
Ooh.
Yes, unfortunately, and for good and understandable reasons. First, consumers in Kenya have for the longest time not known really what is the obligation as far as environmental stewardship is concerned, issues or matters, separation of waste and disposal. Half the time we've always seen it as a nuisance, and the easiest way I can get rid of it, that is the avenue I'll take. So Anne is driving along the highway. You have your PET bottle after consuming your water. You just throw it out of your moving vehicle. That, unfortunately, has been the business as usual scenario. But of course, we are looking at moving to an ideal scenario where the consumer is much more woke, aware of the responsibility as far as environmental protection and protection is concerned, or rather conservation is concerned, and that would involve proper disposal habits. Yes.
Two is the barest of the minimum that we can talk about.
Yes.
But now that brings me to this point. We should really just lay the ground clear on why recycling is important for the waste management of the country. And of course, how does it help in the fight against climate change?
All right, so I think just to take you back to what I had earlier said, pre the industrial phase of our development, historical development globally, there was a lot of focus on making life bearable for the average consumers, and here trying to increase the middle and high-income classes, and ensuring they are conveniently consuming certain products. And so there was a lot of focus on drawing resources from the finite resources from the earth, make it into usable, consumable products, and then introduce it to the consumer. But at no point did we have any producer taking obligation at post-consumption. So once person X has bought this product, what do they do with it after they've consumed the content? And that is what we are calling the linear economy. So it was totally predictive, where we are saying production into wastage. And now the interim transitionary phase is what we are calling the recycling economy. And that sort of feeds into my response to your question as to really what is the importance of recycling in an economy. So first, besides reduction of our reliance on the finite resources from our earth, there's also that aspect of direct implication on the carbon emissions or CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. So we are talking about open burning of waste in landfills and the like. So we've seen research suggesting that not only are these fumes from burning of waste and even open dumping of waste dangerous to our health as individuals or human beings, but we've also seen that there's a lot of data suggesting that direct open burning of waste and open disposal of waste has a direct implication or contribution to the CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. So when you're talking about recycling, this is an immediate intervention to try and curb or minimize the level of pollution that we are doing onto as far as the Earth's surface is concerned. And so besides the aspect of environmental stewardship, environmental protection through direct recycling, then it also contributes directly to the creation of jobs. It's a whole economy in Kenya as far as we are concerned. As KEPRO, as we look at it, we've worked with around 12 recyclers since our inception back in 2021. And through that, we've seen thousands of jobs being created. So really, it's the in-between the linear economy that we are coming from in the industrial phase of development. And then after recycling, realizing full recycling, the ultimate goal is to get towards what you're calling the circular economy, where we'll be drawing very minimal resources as far as virgin materials are concerned for production, and very minimal waste is going into the environment since we'll have entrenched all these principles of circularity when you're talking about repair, recycling, repurposing, and redesign, etc. So recycling is the in-between. Yes.
When you're talking about now recycling being an option for job opportunities or just a leeway for job opportunities for these many young people in the country, do we really have enough government incentives that are supporting the recycling businesses?
Yes, by all standards, we've seen a lot of government interventions as far as not necessarily direct incentives, but even policy direct tax or financial incentives, but even from a regulatory and policy incentive point of view, there's been a lot of government focus and support to embed the principles of circularity and in that case encourage recycling. So starting from way back in 2017, after the ban of the single-use plastic carrier bags, I think there was a deliberate attempt by government to slow down on that harsh approach of banning and instead more of a stick and carrot approach. But we are saying even as we are minimizing the waste that producers are putting out into the market at post-consumption stage, but then what happens after reduction? And so there's been a lot of focus from a policy point of view. So in 2022, there was a Sustainable Waste Management Act, effectively entrenching the principles of circularity in Kenya's environmental journey, conservation journey. We also have a very forward-thinking and forward-looking policy approach that has recently been fully entrenched and now moving to mandatory first, which we are calling the extended producer responsibility, which essentially forms part and parcel of KEPRO's business model. And this is, in essence, to require that producers are taking both technical and financial resources. So when you're talking about financial resources, producers are now required to contribute to a kitty managed by KEPRO. And this kit is supposed to power up the recycling ecosystem in Kenya. So increase their capacities by way of supporting them, increase their feedstock, purchase relevant infrastructure, and the likes. And then when you talk about the technical responsibility, for the longest time, producers were using products and packaging that are not necessarily recyclable. But now there is that legal obligation that even as you are designing a product, you must take cognizance of the fact that there is recycling at the end of it, at post-consumption of these products. So there is that requirement for the producers to also now take responsibility at point of designing of the packaging or product to ensure that ultimately it can be recycled. So those are direct interventions from a policy and regulatory point of view. Of course, there is that support in terms of VAT exemption for importation of necessary infrastructure for recycling and the other materials or machinery that would be needed for one to set up a recycling business. Yes.
You know, there has been this recent push for Kenya to become a global hub for plastic recycling.
Sure.
What's your take on that?
I think it's a good step and sort of piggybacking on what I earlier mentioned about the policy approach of EPR. Kenya has been at the forefront and of course, besides other climate change interventions, speaking to something I'm a subject matter expert on, the extended producer responsibility is a policy approach that now requires that producers are taking responsibility for environment. And so while it is seemingly very unique, Kenya has been the first country globally to mandate all producers, whether by way of importation, manufacturing, conversion, of any form of synthetic product, whether it is a chair you're sitting on, whether it is the TV screen on my back. The idea is that anyone introducing a product in the Kenya market must take responsibility, environmental and financial responsibility for any consequences that may result from its use. So my take is that Kenya is ripe for that journey. I think being a country that hosts quite a number of significant environmental powerhouses in Kenya, where they're talking about UNEP and the likes, really, I think we are ripe for that journey. Yes.
You know, still in the same line, we have critics also arguing that this could make Kenya a dumping site for foreign waste.
Yes.
So how about that concern as well?
No, so I think the regulatory landscape has shifted quite a lot in recent years. So there's a lot of requirements before you're able to ship in any form of waste into the country. Of course, there are certain checks and balances that you have to adhere to. But then again, I'd also want to see it as an opportunity. So if this waste is coming in as a resource, then really it shouldn't be a problem because you're powering up a whole economy that is not only responsible for employment, but also directly contributing to the GDP of the country. So not to try and sound politically correct, but as long as the importation of that fraction of waste is done according to the regulatory requirements that have been put in place, and of course is done in a safe and healthy environment, healthy manner for the environment, then really there shouldn't be a problem. Yes.
And when I was starting this discussion,
Yes.
there's a question that came in: Is
Yes.
Kenya on the right path, or are we at risk of becoming a dumping ground to global waste? Yes, that is a question of concern.
No and yes. So no, in the context of really just what I've said, if waste is coming in as a resource, then and there are proper traceability mechanisms, it's done in a clean and healthy way for the environment, then I'd want to see it as a propeller to Kenya's economy, both from an employment creation and a direct GDP contribution. On the other hand, as far as the risks are concerned, there are certain elements, and these would be looking at the bit about our porous borders and maybe a challenge to the government entities, that systems are put in place, that there is a traceability mechanism. So we are increasingly seeing certain forms of packaging and other products, whether electronic products, that are coming in without a local presence of the manufacturer or the distributor. So that puts into jeopardy the aspect of traceability from both from a regulatory and even from a environmental obligation point of view. So unless systems are put in place to ensure that all these products that are coming into the Kenyan market have proper traceability mechanisms, so that if this TV has been used and has now been dumped, there is a person that can be held accountable to ensure that this waste is removed from the environment and recycled or safely disposed to minimize its impact on the environment. Yes.
You mentioned something about EPR, and that is the extended producer responsibility.
Yes.
And my question is it working? Is it taking shape? Is it fulfilling its mandate? Because I understand that KEPRO, you're one of the bodies helping to implement these regulations.
Yes, yes.
Is it really fulfilling its mandate, which is placing responsibility on manufacturers and imports to manage the entire lifestyle of their products, including those post-consumer waste? So is it doing what it needs to do?
Yes, yes. So we started operations back in 2021, and this was a culmination of different activities, both boardroom and offline interventions, after the ban of the single-use plastic carrier bags back in 2017. And so visionary businesses and manufacturers within the country saw it fit to take it upon themselves, because the problem is not necessarily the post-consumer, the packaging or product that is being put in the shelf for the market. The problem is the management of the post-consumer waste resulting from these products. So after a lot of research and intensive lobbying, the government and private sector agreed that the most appropriate way would be to hold producers accountable for the environmental, or rather, the life cycle of the product. So from 2021 to date, we have been in a journey of experiential learning. So we started as a voluntary scheme, moved into a semi-voluntary scheme after the gazettement of the Sustainable Waste Management Act, and of course the resultant EPR regulations. To the extent that we are currently managing compliance solution for around 1,000 companies in the country, then that should already show you that there is buy-in from private sector, and to the extent that it is actually working, I think to date as a producer responsibility organization, we've directly been able to intervene and ensure that more than 60,000 metric tons of waste has been diverted from landfill and has been recycled and repurposed for much more meaningful use. In terms of direct contribution to the GDP and the economy, last year alone we created over 1,000 jobs directly. And through the EPR fees paid to us by the members, we've also been able to directly disburse over 200 million Kenya shillings since our inception to date. Now, that was in a voluntary ecosystem. So you can imagine that beginning of May, when the government is now going to be enforcing the law to ensure that there's that mandatory compliance, I more than believe that the impact would double within less than 2 years. Yes.
I want us to connect that now to, of course, climate change.
Yes, yes.
Break it down for us how this improper waste disposals now contributes to global warming.
Okay, sure. So I won't delve into the verbatim or the specifics of the data, but as I had earlier alluded to, so we have the Dandoras and the other illegal dump sites and the likes, and open burning of waste has also been normalized in the country within those facilities. So that in itself, apart from creating some sort of a heat island effect, so generation of excessive heat in the burning of those sites, there's also the bit about air pollution, so the wastes emanating, or rather the smell emanating from that. I mean, have you been to Dandora before?
No.
So clearly we need to task you, maybe engage with Paul to have you visit that site, so that you'll have an appreciation of really, from a layman's point of view, how that smell from the site is a direct contribution to air pollution. Yeah. And of course, I'm not necessarily a subject matter expert as far as CO2 emissions are concerned, but there's been a lot of research that shows direct contribution of open dumping and open burning of waste to systemic climate change issues and more specifically global warming. Yes.
All right. Let's take a very short break at this point to coming back with this conversation on the role of recycling in combating climate change with James Odongo, that is the CEO of Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Café. The conversation that you're having this morning is the role of recycling and combating climate change. We have James Odongo in studio, that is the CEO of KEPRO, Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization. And of course, James, before we went on that very short break, we were talking about global warming and how improper waste disposal contributes to that. But you know, reducing emission is very urgent in Kenya at a time where climate change is already leading to droughts, floods. So what impact can really just large-scale recycling have on reducing Kenya's carbon footprint?
Yes. So I think, and going back to the statistics that I referred to, so if you're looking at 3,000 metric tons of waste being generated per day, and only a fraction, of, say 300 tons, an equivalent of 10% being recycled in the country, then that should tell you that we're at a point of concern. We've seen a lot of interventions, and just to help you have a pictorial understanding of what is helping in terms of recycling. We started as a producer responsibility organization focusing on the bread bags for collection and conversion. And for you to be able to collect 1 kg of the bread bags, you need to collect around 200 pieces. So 200, any time 200 households are having bread, that's when we'll be able to cumulatively collect around 1 kg of the bread bags. And so these multiplied by the number of households in the country would give you a pictorial understanding of what would be the environmental impact of these bread bags if they are to be left out in the environment without recycling. So there's that direct contribution. I mean, if we have done a paltry 60,000 metric tons, and within one county you're generating anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 metric tons, multiply that on average 1,000 metric tons per day for each county, 47 counties, 47,000 metric tons per day. That should tell you that a lot more recycling needs to be done. And yes, recycling has a direct impact on reduction of the environmental consequences of the post-consumer waste. Yes.
All right, I want to take you back to what you were talking about EPR, that is Extended Producer Responsibility. And of course, this is a step forward towards responsible waste management. But what are some of the challenges that companies are facing in terms of just complying with these regulations that are there in regards to EPR?
Okay, thank you. And so quickly, EPR is still a relatively new concept. In Kenya, this came into place in around 2021, of course, on a voluntary basis. Globally and even in Africa, I think in Africa, we are seeing only South Africa has it embedded into law as a mandatory requirement for businesses. So now in terms of challenges and the aspect of compliance, one major challenge for us is that producers, manufacturers, and converters in the country are dealing with significant macro and microeconomic challenges. And so any other additional costs as far as compliance is concerned is ordinarily seen as a nuisance. And so majority would comply for the sake of it. To the extent that this is still seen as a financial inconvenience for businesses, then there's only so much you can be able to achieve. The other challenge we are facing is that, and this is speaking from a producer point of view, is that the legislative aspect of EPR has not been so clear. Initially, we had the Act, and then there was a window of around 2 years before the regulations were gazetted. So the regulations were gazetted in 2024 November. And so from May, we are going to be moving towards a more mandatory. Right now, we're in a transitionary phase. So after gazettement of a regulation, you need 6 months before you start enforcement. So from May 4th, we expect that NEMA will start enforcement. But we are noticing that there's also that lack or absence of awareness amongst the would-be responsible or affected producers and manufacturers. So that aspect of awareness is also another challenge I see. The interpretation of the law from a regulatory standpoint is also another challenge. So in the new regulations that were gazetted, we saw that there was an introduction of what we are calling the importation levy. And while producers would not necessarily have a problem with this levy being levied upon them, the interpretation or the ambiguity of the clause that introduces this fee has been a point of contention. So the law says that at point of import or point of entry, products will be subjected to Kenya shillings 150 per item. So the per item clause is quite confusing because we don't know whether it's on a batch basis or on a product-specific basis at an SKU point. And this would mean that the pen you're holding would have an additional levy of 150 shillings in addition to other fees and taxes. So that would also mean the consumables would be out of reach for the ordinary mwananchi, and that has also been a point of concern. So for majority of the producers, the fact that it is hitting their profit and loss statement means that this is a burden that they'd rather avoid, but we're incrementally now trying to sensitize them and making them aware that moving towards more circular business models, including compliance on EPR, is just but only one way of future-proofing your business. Because the reality is, if you're not taking action as a private sector entity, then the government, by all means, will resort to the language they best know of banning packaging and other products that they would deem stubborn to the environment. Yes.
Anyway, but will they be banning these things forever and ever? Something needs to be done.
Yes. And that's why EPR is coming as a solution, where we are saying instead of banning, then let's manage the consequences of these products. Yes.
All right. Now, looking ahead, what does the future of recycling look like in the country as we wind up?
Sure. So I think, and today is quite monumental because it's literally the World Recycling Day, first celebrated in 2018. When you're talking about the future, I think it's only but luminous to the extent that we are seeing a new and very woke generation of consumers that is now increasingly becoming inquisitive or notice their role as far as proper disposal of waste is concerned. And that has necessitated a conversation for the recyclers to increase their capacities as far as recycling is concerned, because now they are hopeful that much more waste that is cleaner, segregated, and of quality in nature would be coming to their facility as feedstock. And so we believe that the recycling economy is going to definitely expand. Yes, especially with now the implementation and mandatory enforcement of EPR legislation in the country. Yes.
James, maybe now in your final remarks, you could talk to us about, you were telling me about a tour that you have called the Taka Taka tour.
Sure.
Talk to us about that.
So this is just something we put together in commemoration or celebration of the World Recycling Day. And we are bringing members of the public, producers, and any other person who'd be interested in trying to understand the circular journey of packaging and related products in Kenya, to have a first-person viewpoint of what is going on. So the attendees will be visiting Dandora, just to understand really, when I don't properly dispose of my waste, where does it end up in? They'll also be visiting a few sites managed by the recyclers we've contracted, for them to also have an appreciation of what happens if I do the right thing as far as disposal, separation of waste at source is concerned. Yes, yes.
Final parting shots. Sure. Now, this is not just a general opinion to this.
Yes.
Is recycling the game changer to ending climate change?
Not necessarily a game changer, but a contributor to a multiplicity of other interventions. So in its independence, from an independent viewpoint in terms of recycling, yes, it's a game changer, but it's also a contributor to a systemic intervention that would be required, of course, based on other interventions in other sectors. Yeah, I see recycling as a game changer.
All right.
Yes.
That was James Odongo, CEO, Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO. Thank you so much, James, for making time for us to have this conversation on the role of recycling in combating climate change. We hope that Kenyans are going to make recycling a culture. That is what you stand for in KEPRO?
Definitely, and properly disposing of your waste.
Absolutely.